There's a specific kind of confusion that happens when you've looked up all three. Low testosterone, burnout, depression, and every single one of them sounds exactly like you. The fatigue, the flatness, the cognitive drag, the loss of something you can feel but cannot name. Every list, every symptom, every description. All three columns match. That is not a coincidence. And it is not a failure of self-knowledge. Here is what is actually happening. Those three conditions share a common biological origin. They are not three separate diagnoses between which you must choose. They are three downstream expressions of the same upstream cascade, running in the same man at the same time from the same source. This video is a map of that cascade. By the end of it, you will have a framework for understanding which of the three is primary, why your blood work may have come back normal, and what the one question is that actually moves this forward. Not a symptom checklist, a mechanism map. Let's start with why all three conditions look identical on paper. Most content on this topic gives you a side-by-side comparison. Low T symptoms in one column, depression in another, burnout in a third. The suggestion is that if you read carefully enough, one column will fit better than the others. Here is the problem with that approach. For a man in sustained high-performance roles, the kind that involve consistent responsibility, high-stakes decisions, and a cognitive load that does not end when the laptop closes, all three columns describe the same biology. Fatigue, flatness, cognitive drag, loss of drive, disrupted sleep, sexual disconnection. Those symptoms appear on every list because they are produced by the same upstream mechanism. Here is the mechanism. The body runs two critical axes. The HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal system, manages your stress response. The HPG axis, the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal system, manages testosterone production. These two systems share resources. Specifically, they share a precursor hormone called pregnenolone. When the HPA axis is running a chronic stress load, the kind that sustained executive performance requires, it is allocating pregnenolone to cortisol production. That allocation comes directly at the cost of testosterone synthesis. This is not a metaphor. It is a documented biochemical trade-off. Now add this. Chronically elevated cortisol does not just suppress testosterone. It also dysregulates the neurotransmitter systems, dopamine, serotonin, that underlie mood, motivation, and the experience of reward. Which means, a man running this cascade long enough will eventually present with symptoms indistinguishable from clinical depression. Not because he is clinically depressed in the primary sense, but because his neurotransmitter environment has been reorganized by a hormonal cascade that began years earlier. The symptom overlap is not a diagnostic coincidence. It is a biological sequence, and that sequence has a specific order, which is exactly what gives you the map. So how do you actually tell these three conditions apart? Symptom lists cannot distinguish these three conditions. The distinguishing variables are not what the symptoms are. They are when the symptoms started and how they respond to recovery inputs. Those two variables tell you something a symptom comparison cannot. Here is the sequence. Burnout arrives with a recognizable accumulation arc. There is a before and an after. The man experiencing primary burnout can usually identify a period, a specific season, a specific project, a specific sustained load, where the depletion accelerated. Recovery inputs move the needle. Not completely, not immediately, but rest, deload, and reduced cognitive demand produce a measurable response. The system has been depleted. It responds to replenishment. Low testosterone has a different signature entirely. The onset is slower and flatter. There is no clear before and after. The man experiencing primary testosterone suppression often cannot identify when it started, because it has been gradual enough that each threshold felt like adjustment, not loss. The critical distinguishing signal. This condition does not respond to rest. A week off, a vacation, a reduced load month. The fatigue and flatness remain essentially unchanged. The system is not depleted. It is running on a suppressed hormonal baseline. Replenishment does not fix a suppressed baseline. The input that is missing is not recovery. It is the hormonal signal itself. Clinical depression as a primary condition has a third signature, and it is qualitatively different in one specific way. Anhedonia, not just low motivation, not just flat affect, The actual loss of pleasure in things that used to produce it. The activities, the people, the achievements that previously registered as rewarding, they no longer do. That specific signal, not low drive toward new things, but the absence of reward from things that used to work, is the clearest distinguishing marker of primary clinical depression. It is also present in the late stages of the cascade described above, which is why sequence matters. If the anhedonia arrived after years of cognitive flatness and fatigue, if the flatness came first and the loss of pleasure developed slowly on top of it, that is downstream neurochemistry from a hormonal cascade. If the anhedonia was present at or near onset, if the loss of pleasure arrived without a prior period of depletion or hormonal drift, that is a different clinical picture. The sequence is the map, not the symptoms, the order in which they arrived. Now we need to talk about what happens when you actually go get tested. Here is where most men in this situation hit the wall. They go to their doctor. They describe the symptoms, the fatigue, the flatness, the cognitive drag. They get blood work. The results come back. The doctor says, your testosterone is normal. That sentence, your testosterone is normal, is not a diagnosis. It is a description of what was measured. And what was measured in most standard panels is total testosterone. Total testosterone is not the number that actually matters. Here is why. Testosterone in the bloodstream exists in two forms. Bound testosterone, attached to a protein called sex hormone binding globulin, SHBG, is biologically inactive. The body cannot use it. Free testosterone, the fraction that is not bound to SHBG, is the biologically active form. That is what actually drives the functions you are noticing the loss of. A man can have a total testosterone number that sits in the normal reference range, while his free testosterone is substantially below what his brain and body require. Because SHBG rises with age, stress, and insulin resistance, all of which are present in the high-performing man at 45, the bound fraction increases and the available fraction shrinks. Standard blood work does not check free testosterone unless you ask for it. Standard blood work does not check SHBG unless you ask for it. Standard blood work does not assess cortisol pattern, which is the upstream driver of the entire cascade. The man who has been told his blood work is normal and his symptoms are stress has not been evaluated and cleared. He has been evaluated for the wrong variables. This is a system problem, which means it has system solutions. The failure is not diagnostic incompetence. It is structural. Standard primary care evaluation for this symptom cluster was not designed for the specific hormonal picture that sustained high performance produces. A cortisol pattern that has been dysregulated for 7 years will not appear on a fasting glucose panel. A free testosterone that has been declining for a decade will not appear on a total testosterone draw. The confusion you have been living inside is the predictable output of an evaluation framework that was not built for this cascade. That is not a small thing to understand. It changes the question from what is wrong with me to what has not yet been measured. For anyone who wants to take this further, the resource linked in the description is the Executive Hormone Panel Guide. It covers the specific 9 biomarkers to request, what the optimal ranges actually look like for men in this situation, and how to have that conversation with your doctor without sounding like you've been watching YouTube. Link is in the description and the pinned comment. So what do you actually do with all of this? The framework this video has given you changes the question you are holding. Most men arrive at this cluster holding the question, which of the 3 conditions do I have? That is the wrong first question. Not because the conditions don't matter, they do, and distinguishing them is important, but because that question cannot be answered before a different question is answered first. Is the HPA, HPG cascade running? That question is answerable with a specific panel. This week, here is what that means in practice. If you have had blood work in the last 2 years and total testosterone was the only androgen measured, you have not yet been evaluated for the primary variable in this cascade. Request free testosterone and SHBG alongside any future draw. Request a morning cortisol, ideally salivary, covering 2 time points to assess the cortisol pattern. Morning testosterone should be drawn before 9 a.m. That is not a preference, it is the clinical standard. Hold those 2 distinguishing signals as you wait for results. First, the time pattern of onset. Was there a specific accumulation arc you can trace, a before and an after? Or has the drift been gradual enough that there is no clear starting point. Second, the response to recovery. When load reduces, weekends, rest, vacation, does the flatness and fatigue shift even slightly? Or does it remain essentially unchanged regardless of what the external conditions do? Those two signals, combined with the biomarker panel, give you something no symptom comparison list can give you: a working hypothesis about which condition is primary and therefore which intervention to test first. One last thing, for a significant number of men who arrive at this video, the answer will not be one condition. It will be the full cascade: burnout as the presenting load, low T as the hormonal consequence of that load, and downstream neurotransmitter disruption that resembles depression. That is not a worse diagnosis. It is actually more tractable, because if all three are downstream of the same upstream mechanism, the cortisol pattern and the hormonal suppression it produces, then addressing the upstream input does not require three separate interventions. It requires one precise lever, pulled at the right level of the system. The confusion you arrived with was not evidence that your situation is unusually complex. It was evidence that you were asking the right question in the wrong framework. The video showed you what the standard panel misses. The Executive Hormone Panel Guide in the description shows you what to ask for next time you're in that room. The 9 specific biomarkers, the optimal ranges, and the exact language to use. Which of the 3 did you arrive here thinking it was, and has anything shifted after watching this? What you have now that you did not have at the beginning of this video is a map of the mechanism, not a diagnosis, not a verdict, a map. The 3 conditions that felt like 3 separate doors are downstream expressions of the same upstream system. That system has a sequence. It has measurable variables. It has inputs that can be changed. The confusion you arrived with was the correct response to an evaluation framework that was not built for this cascade. It was not a failure of self-knowledge. It was the predictable output of being measured for the wrong things. What changes now is the question you hold. Not, which condition do I have? That question keeps you in a loop between 3 symptom lists that all match because they describe the same biology. The question that moves this forward is the cascade running? And where is the upstream point at which it can be interrupted? That question is answerable with a specific panel, with 2 distinguishing signals you can observe starting tonight, with a framework for knowing which condition is primary and therefore which intervention to test first. The man who does not have this map experiences what is happening as a 3-way diagnostic confusion that produces the same helplessness regardless of which label he tentatively applies to himself. The man who has this map knows he is not choosing between 3 diagnoses. He is tracing one cascade to its source and identifying the specific point in that cascade where a single input changes the output. That is not a smaller problem than the one you arrived with. That is a more solvable one. Not 3 conditions, 1 system, 1 upstream question, 1 panel that answers it. What you do with that is what the next video will take further.